They were going to push them all over. She made one phone call. 900 apple trees, still alive, marked for a bulldozer by Friday. Her grandfather's grafting knife was still warm from her pocket when she dialed. The bank said yes before she even finished her sentence. Eleanor hangs up the phone, stares at the grafting knife on the table, and opens her grandfather's journal to a dog-eared page marked, "On transplanting mature stock." The kitchen is quiet. January light slides through the window above the sink, pale and thin as skim milk, and it catches the brass handle of that folding knife, Orrin Cross's grafting knife, clipped to her right front pocket every day for 8 months now. But tonight, she'd set it on the table next to the phone like a talisman, like she needed it close while she made the call. 60 acres outside Corvallis, Oregon. That's what Orrin left her. 60 acres of mixed-use land, some pasture gone to ryegrass, some timber along the North Ridge, a barn with a new enough roof and soil so volcanic dark it stains your boots black after a rain. Orrin Cross worked this ground for 41 years, and the county considered him a stubborn eccentric the entire time. He composted when they sprayed. He interplanted when they monocropped. He grafted heritage varieties onto rootstock nobody wanted when the market screamed for Red Delicious and nothing else. The neighbors smiled at him the way you smile at a man talking to his chickens, polite, distant, a little embarrassed for him. He died in March. Eleanor drove out from Portland with a duffel bag and the key to his front door, and never drove back. Now, the Halverson Orchard, 40 acres due east, just past the gravel road. 912 apple trees, Gravenstein, Jonagold, a few rows of Spitzenberg nobody planted commercially anymore. The Halversons went bankrupt in October. Quiet bankruptcy, the kind that happens when a man's medical bills eat his equity, and the bank forecloses while he's still in the hospital bed. The orchard belongs to Pacific Western Savings now, and Pacific Western Savings doesn't give a damn about apples. They've got a developer lined up, housing subdivision, cul-de-sacs and vinyl siding. The demolition crew is scheduled for late January. A fleet of excavators to push every tree flat, grind the stumps, and grade the lot smooth as a parking garage. 912 trees, some of them 40 years old. Root systems reaching 8 feet deep into Willamette Valley clay. Gone in a week. Eleanor turns the journal page. Orrin's handwriting, cramped, slanting left, written with the same mechanical pencil he used for everything, fills the margins around a sketch of a root ball cross-section. The entry reads, "A tree over 10 years is not a thing. It is a system. Move the system, not the trunk. You must take a radius of roots proportional to the canopy spread. You must cut clean. You must keep the mycorrhizal mat intact, or the tree will spend 3 years rebuilding what you destroyed in an afternoon." And below that, underlined twice, "The land doesn't owe you fruit. You owe it a reason to bear." She reads it again, touches the page where his pencil pressed hard enough to groove the paper. Then she picks up the phone and calls Pacific Western's Asset Liquidation Office. Here's the thing about banks. They think in columns. Demolition of the Halverson Orchard, line item, $14,000. Stump grinding, hauling, grading. That number sits on someone's spreadsheet as a cost, a negative. and Eleanor asks the one question nobody's thought to ask. What if I take the trees off your hands? The officer on the line, a woman named Deborah, pauses. You can hear the chair creak as she leans back. She checks with the supervisor. Comes back 2 minutes later. Yes. Yes, the bank will allow removal of the trees prior to demolition. The bank saves $14,000 in site clearing costs. Eleanor gets the trees for nothing. For $0. She just has to move them before the deadline. The phone clicks dead. Eleanor sits in the kitchen with Oren's journal open, the grafting knife catching that thin January light, and the quiet understanding that she just agreed to transplant 912 mature apple trees onto her 60 acres with no crew and no budget. 3 days later, Dale Partlow's tan loafers crunch up her gravel drive. You know the type. County extension agent. Clipboard tucked under his left arm with that little county seal sticker on the back. Pressed khaki chinos without a single crease out of place. Light blue short-sleeve button-down, silver ballpoint pen in the breast pocket like a medal he awarded himself. Sandy blonde hair, parted neat as a ruled line. He stands on her porch with his chin tilted up, weight back on his heels, and he smiles the way a banker smiles at someone asking for a loan they'll never approve. Miss Cross, the transfer paperwork requires a site plan. He taps the clipboard. Soil survey, drainage map, planting grid with spacing calculations. Standard procedure. That pale blue gaze drifts past her toward the barn, the fields, the empty rows where nothing's planted. I'm just curious, how exactly do you intend to move 900 mature apple trees with no crew and no budget? She leans in the doorframe, sleeves of that olive green canvas work shirt rolled to her elbows, soil under her fingernails from the morning's compost turning. The crescent-shaped birthmark below her left ear catches shadow. One at a time. Partlow's smile doesn't waver. It just goes flat at the edges, the way a man's face goes when he's already decided you're beneath serious conversation. He writes something on his clipboard, clicks his pen, and walks back to his truck without another word. She doesn't watch him leave. That afternoon, Eleanor drives east on the gravel road and walks the Halverson rows alone. A ball of orange twine in her left hand, the grafting knife in her right. She moves slow, methodical. Each tree gets 30 seconds of attention. She checks the graft union first, that swollen knuckle where scion meets rootstock, looking for clean healing versus bark splits that signal internal rot. She kneels at the base, brushes soil away from the root flare, measures diameter with her spread hand. 4 inches of flare means a manageable root ball. 6 inches means heavy equipment she doesn't have. And the cambium test. She presses her thumbnail into the bark, just barely, just enough to lift a sliver the size of a rice grain. Green underneath means alive. Brown means dead wood walking. She marks the living ones with orange twine, ties a simple half-hitch around the lowest branch, and moves on. Row after row. The sun drops behind the coast range. Her breath fogs in the cold. She drives past the orchard at dusk and counts the orange surveyor ribbons. 912 trees, each one still breathing, and the excavator's engine is cold. 3 days before the bank's demolition deadline, Eleanor rents a backhoe for $175 a week and begins cutting root balls in the frozen January ground. Now, here's the thing about digging up a mature apple tree in January in the Willamette Valley. The soil is not your friend. It's a dense, silty clay that freezes in sheets, not deep like the Midwest, but shallow and mean, a crust that fights your blade at every inch. And beneath that crust, the roots of a 20-year-old apple spread wider than you'd think, wider than the canopy. A Gravenstein that stands 12 feet tall might have feeder roots reaching 18, 20 feet from the trunk in every direction. You can't save them all. You're not trying to. What you're trying to save is the root ball, that dense knot of primary and secondary roots closest to the trunk that holds the tree's memory of how to drink. Eleanor's grandfather wrote it plainly in the third journal, the one with the water-stained cover. 18 inches minimum from the trunk, cut at 45 degrees. A clean angle heals. A torn root rots. So she marks each tree with a stick driven into the frozen ground at 18 inches, walks the circle, then takes the sharpened spade, not the backhoe, not yet, and cuts. The blade goes in at that 45-degree angle, and she feels it when she hits a feeder root. There's a give, then a snap, then the spade slides through. She works the circle in sections, loosening one side, then the opposite, keeping tension balanced so the ball doesn't crack apart in the clay. The backhoe does the heavy lifting, slides under the loosened ball like a spatula under a pancake. But the precision work is all her. Hands wrapped in electrical tape over split blisters. The brass-handled grafting knife clipped to her right pocket, used to trim any torn root clean before she wraps the ball in wet burlap and cinches it tight with baling wire. Every tree gets the same treatment. Every tree takes between 40 minutes and an hour. 912 trees. She does the math every night. 14 trees a day if she pushes hard. 65 days to move them all. She doesn't have 65 days of savings. She doesn't have 65 days of daylight in January and February. She has maybe 50 working days before the ground thaws and the mud makes the backhoe useless. Margaret shows up on the 4th morning. No announcement, no phone call. Just the sound of a truck engine at 7:15, and then a petite woman in a plum cardigan stepping down from the cab of a rusted flatbed Ford, a dented aluminum thermos in one hand and a paper sack in the other. Margaret Cross, the old man's sister, late 60s, silver-gray hair pinned back, gold studs in her ears catching the pale winter light. She sets the thermos on the truck's tailgate, unwraps a sandwich from wax paper and says, "Truck's gassed, I'll drive." That's it. That's all she says. And from that day forward, Margaret appears at noon with the thermos of coffee and a sandwich, drives the flatbed when Eleanor loads a tree, and disappears by 4 o'clock without a word of advice or encouragement. Just presence. Just the quiet fact of showing up. They develop a rhythm. Eleanor cuts and wraps. Margaret backs the flatbed between rows. They load 3 trees per trip, drive them 1.5 miles to Eleanor's 40 acres, and plant. The planting is where it goes wrong first. 30 Jonagolds, beautiful trees, thick trunks, tight root balls, go into the ground in the 2nd week of February. Eleanor digs the holes 2 feet deep, sets the balls, backfills with the native clay. standard practice, according to every extension pamphlet she's ever read. And then it rains. 3 inches in 2 days. The clay swells, then contracts as it freezes overnight, and the shallow planted balls heave upward like the earth is spitting them out. She finds them on a Tuesday morning, roots exposed to open air, bark splitting where ice crystals formed in the cambium layer. 30 trees, cracking like dry firewood. She kneels in the mud and presses her thumb against a split trunk. The wood beneath is still green, still alive, but barely. The diagnosis takes her an hour of staring and one rereading of her grandfather's notes on soil structure. The clay is too dense. Water pools around the roots instead of draining. She needs organic matter, compost, leaf mold, anything that will break the clay's grip and let oxygen reach the feeder roots. She needs cubic yards of it, and she has exactly $0 budgeted for soil amendments. What she does have is stubbornness and a phone book. The Corvallis Municipal Composting Yard sells finished compost at $45 a cubic yard. But they also have a pile, a big, ugly, steaming pile, of leaf mold that tested positive for weed seeds. Can't bag it, can't sell it, costs them money to store. Eleanor drives down on a Wednesday, talks to the yard manager for 6 minutes, and leaves with a handshake deal. She hauls away as much contaminated leaf mold as she wants, for free, whenever she wants. 6 cubic yards at a time in Margaret's flatbed. The weed seeds don't matter. She's planting into holes, not spreading on a lawn. The organic matter is what matters. Dark, crumbly, alive with fungal threads that smell like a forest floor after rain. Dale Partlow shows up the following week. Polished tan loafers, somehow still clean despite the mud. Clipboard tucked under his left arm, county seal sticker facing out like a badge. He walks the new planting rows with that military spine of his, chin lifted, pale blue eyes scanning, and says, "Miss Cross, you've got 900 trees with no irrigation infrastructure. County average rainfall won't carry transplants through July. You're looking at 60% mortality without supplemental water." He pulls a pamphlet from his clipboard. Drip line systems. $22,000 installed. He holds it out with that patient smile, the one that says, "You poor, stupid girl." Eleanor takes the pamphlet, folds it once, tucks it into her back pocket without reading it. "Thank you, Dale." She keeps digging. By the end of February, she has moved 212 trees. Her back is wrecked. Her savings account shows $340, and not a single tree has leafed. On March 14th, she notices a single pale green bud on the first Gravenstein she planted. Tree number 1, row A, the one she'd given up on. Let me tell you what that looks like, because it doesn't look like hope. It looks like a pimple. A swollen nub the size of a match head, barely green, pushing through bark that's been gray and dead-looking for 6 weeks. Eleanor almost misses it. She's hauling a 5-gallon bucket in each hand, creek water sloshing over the rims, and she glances sideways at tree 1 because she always does. The way you glance at a clock you know is broken. But it's not broken. She sets the buckets down, kneels in the mud, pulls her grandfather's brass-handled grafting knife from her right front pocket, and uses the flat of the blade to press gently against the bark beside the bud. Underneath, The cambium is pale cream where she expected brown. Alive. What's happening beneath the soil line is invisible but specific. Adventitious roots, brand new ones, hair thin, pushing outward from the cut ends of the original root ball. The tree's cambium layer has sealed over the wounds where she severed it from its old ground. And the stored carbohydrate reserves in the trunk, sugars the Gravenstein banked last summer when it was still Halverson's problem, are spending themselves now, pushing energy upward into this single bud like a last bet on a long shot. One tree, one bud. 211 others still silent. But one is not zero. That night she opens Oren's journal to a page near the middle, one she's read 4 times already. His handwriting slopes hard to the right, written fast, the ink of a man thinking faster than he could move his hand. The entry is from 1979, when he'd been trying to establish a dwarf pear row from nursery stock that arrived half dead. His system, and here's the part that changes everything for Eleanor, was staged transplanting. He never moved more than 30 trees in a single cohort. 30 in the ground, 2 weeks of observation, then 30 more. Small batches, controlled failure. If a cohort dies, you lose 30 trees and gain a diagnosis. If you move 200 at once and they all die, you've learned nothing except that you're broke. Eleanor had moved 212 at once. She'd been desperate, racing February frost, and she'd ignored the old man's patience. So she adapts. She can't undo what's done, but she can change what comes next. The 700 trees still standing in Halverson's field. Those she'll move in cohorts. 30 at a time. 2 weeks between each group. And for the 212 already in her ground, she adjusts her care based on tree 1's survival. Deeper planting holes going forward. 24 inches instead of 18, because the trees that went deepest are showing the most cambium activity. A 4-inch mulch ring around each trunk, using that free compost from the county waste facility. The stuff that smells like a barn floor, but holds moisture like a sponge. And a hand-watering schedule that would break most people. 5-gallon buckets filled from the creek, 45 minutes per row, twice a week. Her forearms are roped with new muscle by the end of the first week. She does not own a hose long enough to reach the orchard. She does not buy one. The buckets are what she has. Now, let me tell you about the co-op feed store on Route 9, because that's where the mockery reaches its peak. Mid-April, Eleanor walks in to buy 50 pounds of layer feed for her 12 hens. Hens that eat scraps and give her the only protein she doesn't have to purchase. She's mud to the elbows, her olive-green canvas shirt dark with creek water, the cracked sole of her left boot squelching on the linoleum. A man named Gus Tibbett, farms 800 acres of conventional hay east of town, is leaning against the counter with 2 other guys. He watches her grab the feed bag and says, loud enough for the whole store to hear, "There she is, the girl planting a graveyard." The other 2 laugh. One of them snorts coffee. Eleanor sets the bag on the counter, pays, $11.40, gets her receipt, walks out. She doesn't speed up. She doesn't slow down. She doesn't turn around. Gus Tibbett will remember this moment differently in 3 years, but we'll get to that. That same night, Eleanor sits at the kitchen table, the one with the uneven leg that rocks when she writes. and opens Oren's journal to a passage she's underlined twice. His handwriting here is slower, deliberate, the pen pressed hard enough to dent the next page. The land doesn't owe you fruit. You owe it a reason to bear. She reads it once, reads it again. Then she takes a pencil from the mason jar by the salt shaker and writes below it, in her own hand, in letters half the size of his. 168 reasons so far. Because by mid-April, that's the count. 168 of her 212 transplanted trees are showing buds, leafing. Pale green, tentative, fragile as wet paper, but alive. 44 are dead. She marks each one with a strip of red cloth tied to the lowest branch. She doesn't mourn them. She studies them. The dead ones went in shallow. The dead ones sat in a low drainage line where water pooled after rain. The dead ones teach her where not to plant the next cohort. But here's the problem pressing against her like a wall. 700 trees still stand in Halverson's field. The removal deadline is June 1st. That gives her roughly 6 weeks to move 700 trees in cohorts of 30, which means, she does the math on the back of a feed receipt, 23 cohorts, each needing 2 weeks of establishment observation. Impossible. The math doesn't work unless she overlaps cohorts and moves faster. So she finds help. 2 women from town, both underemployed, both strong, both willing to take a strange deal. Eleanor offers them shares of future apple harvest instead of cash. 10% each of whatever the orchard produces in its first bearing year. They shake on it. No contract, no lawyer. A handshake and Eleanor's word, which in this county carries exactly as much weight as her bank account, which is to say, not much. But they show up. 5 a.m., 3 days a week. Buckets and shovels and the smell of creek mud. By May, 168 of the 212 transplanted trees are leafing. 44 are dead. And she still has 700 trees standing in the Halverson field with a June 1st final removal deadline. June 1st. The last flatbed load, 38 trees, root balls wrapped tight, rolls onto Eleanor's property at 11:47 p.m. Headlights cutting through June dark. The diesel rattle of a rented backhoe cooling on the trailer. 2 hired hands from the feed store, brothers named Colvin, leaning against the cab with cigarettes and aching backs. 9 weeks they've been at this. 9 weeks of pre-dawn starts, root balls heavy as caskets, the backhoe gouging holes in ground that hadn't been broken since her grandfather's time. 900 trees moved. She left 12 dead ones standing in the Halverson field, gray trunks, hollow cores, not worth the diesel to dig them. The rest are in the ground, every last one. The Colvin brothers collect their pay, cash, counted out on the tailgate, and the older one, Ray, looks at the rows stretching south into the dark and says nothing for a long moment. Then, "Hope they take." Eleanor nods. That's the whole conversation. 700 trees planted in 9 weeks on top of the 200 already established. Her savings account reads $340. The backhoe rental alone was $1,800 for 6 weeks, and she'd negotiated that down from $2,400 by agreeing to fuel it herself. Diesel at 89 cents a gallon, burning through 6 gallons a day. Do the math. She did. Every night at the kitchen table with a pencil stub and Oren's leather journal open beside her, the numbers got tighter and tighter until they barely breathed. But the trees are in the ground. Now they need water. Oren's journal, page 47. A sketch dated March 1971. Contour lines running from the spring-fed pond on the property's northeast corner, dropping in elevation through what would become the orchard rows. A gravity-fed irrigation ditch. He'd drawn it in blue pencil, annotated it with measurements, even calculated the grade. 2 inches of drop per 100 feet of run. Enough flow to move water without eroding the channel bottom. Enough slope to keep it from stagnating. He'd never built it. 17 years that sketch sat in the journal, waiting. She starts June 3rd. A hand level borrowed from Margaret. A ball of white cotton twine. Wooden stakes she splits from a downed oak with the hatchet. Eleanor walks the contour alone, sighting through the level, driving stakes every 20 feet, tying twine between them so the line reads true against the slope. The land looks flat to the eye, but it isn't. It rolls, dips, rises in gentle undulations that Orrin had mapped with a precision she's only now appreciating. His blue pencil lines match the terrain within an inch. She checks, she rechecks. The stakes march downhill from the pond in a gentle curve that follows the natural shelf of the hillside, bending west where the slope steepens, straightening where it levels. Then the digging. A mattock, a flat-bladed shovel, her own 2 hands. The main channel runs 1,100 feet from pond to the first orchard row. She digs 2 feet wide, 18 inches deep, cutting through topsoil into the red clay subsoil beneath. That clay is the key. Orrin noted it on page 49. Clay subsoil packs like mortar when wet. Line the channel. 3-inch layers, tamped with a flat board. Water won't seep through packed clay any more than it'll seep through glass. 6 weeks, dawn to dusk when the trees don't need tending. Her shoulders burn. Blisters form, break, callus over. The crescent-shaped birthmark below her left ear disappears under a layer of red dust she stops bothering to wash off until evening. She packs the clay lining in stages, wet it, spread 3 inches, tamp it flat with a section of 2x6, let it dry overnight. Repeat. 3 layers, 9 inches of packed clay lining every foot of that 1,100-foot channel. Her hands crack at the knuckles. The brass-handled grafting knife stays clipped to her right pocket, clicking against the mattock handle with every swing. Have you ever wagered everything on an idea no one else believed in? 900 trees in the ground, a hand-dug ditch, and a grandfather's notebook as your only engineering degree. No contractor, no permit office, no engineer's stamp. Just blue pencil lines from a dead man's hand and the stubborn belief that he knew what the water would do. Mid-July. She opens the channel head at the pond. Water moves. Slow, clear, steady, following the grade exactly as Orrin drew it. It reaches the first row in 4 minutes, the second in 6. By the third row, the trees are drinking. Then August hits. Drought stress announces itself quietly at first. Leaves curling inward on the south-facing slope. The Gravensteins and Pippins planted where afternoon sun hammers the ground from noon to 5. Some trees dropping small green fruit. Premature abscission. The tree sacrificing its crop to survive. She walks the rows and sees it. The south slope loses water twice as fast as the north. Evaporation pulling moisture from the soil before roots can drink deep enough. She adjusts. A second watering pass on the south slope. She digs a shallow lateral ditch branching off the main channel, running it between every other row on the exposed face. Then shade screens, old burlap bags from the feed store, stretched between stakes driven on the sun side of the youngest transplants. Crude. Effective. The burlap cuts direct radiation by maybe 40%. Enough. The leaf curl stops within a week. Dale Partlow's tan loafers appear on August 9th, third visit. He walks the edge of the ditch with his clipboard tucked under his left arm, his pale blue eyes following the water line. The small mole on his right earlobe catches the light as he turns his head, examining the clay lining like it personally offends him. He writes something. Then he looks up. This ditch may require a water rights filing with the county. You're diverting from a natural spring source. His voice is patient, almost kind, the way you'd explain something to someone you've already decided can't understand it. Eleanor's pale gray-green eyes don't waver. I'll need the form. He pats his clipboard, flips a page, flips another. I don't have it with me today. I'll wait, she says. 3 words, a closed door. He stands there another 30 seconds, then walks back to his truck with that military straight spine, chin lifted, loafers somehow still clean despite the mud. He never brings the form. Mid-August. The irrigation ditch is running, the trees are drinking, and Dale Partlow's pamphlet is still folded in her back pocket, unused. September 1988. 13 months after the first tree went in the ground. Eleanor walks row A and counts. 42 Gravensteins heavy with fruit, branches bowing under weight they haven't carried in 3 years. She runs her thumb across the skin of one apple hanging at shoulder height. The color tells her everything Oren's journal said it would. That shift from hard green to yellow-green. Not yellow, not yet, but that moment when the chlorophyll starts stepping back and letting the sugars announce themselves through the skin. She pulls the brass-handled grafting knife from her right front pocket, cuts one apple free, and slices it clean in half. Seeds, dark brown, almost mahogany, no white left. She presses her thumb into the flesh, firm, resistant, but with just enough give. 14 to 16 pounds of pressure on a penetrometer, if she had one. She doesn't. She has her hands, and her hands have learned. 340 trees out of 900 are bearing this year. The rest are still recovering, putting energy into root systems, rebuilding cambium layers, learning to drink from soil that finally feeds them instead of starving them. But 340 mature Gravensteins averaging 32 pounds of fruit per tree. That's 10,880 pounds of apples hanging in this orchard right now. And a Gravenstein doesn't wait. You pick it when it's ready, or you lose it to the ground. She hires 2 helpers from the next valley over. A married couple who pick pears every fall and know how to handle a ladder without bruising fruit. Margaret comes too, her silver-gray hair tucked under a wide straw hat, her dented aluminum thermos sitting on the tailgate of Eleanor's truck. They fill the wooden crates Oren built in the 1960s. Douglas fir sides, hand-cut dovetail joints, his initials burned into the bottom left corner with a soldering iron. Each crate holds 40 pounds. They stack them 3 high in the truck bed, and by the end of the 3rd day, they've pulled 270 crates off those trees. Now here's where Eleanor does something the county extension office would call irrational. A commercial distributor out of Salem, Pacific Orchard Supply, sends a buyer to her gate. He walks the rows, clipboard in hand, and offers her 18 cents a pound. 18 cents. For Gravenstein apples that haven't seen a drop of synthetic anything. For fruit from trees that Oren Cross planted when Eisenhower was president. The buyer actually says it out loud. Unknown orchard, no spray record we can verify, no retail relationship. 18 cents is generous for what this is. What this is. Eleanor looks at him with those pale gray-green eyes and says nothing, just shakes her head once. He drives away thinking she's a fool. She's not a fool. She's been reading the farmers' market bulletins since June. Heirloom Gravensteins, the variety supermarkets abandoned because it bruises in shipping, and doesn't stack pretty on a shelf. Sell for 60 to 80 cents a pound at direct markets in the Willamette Valley. People drive 20 miles for them. They remember eating them as children. They want that tart-sweet balance you can't find in a Red Delicious. But the night before her first market, a Saturday in Corvallis, Eleanor sits alone at the kitchen table, and the math won't stop running through her skull. She still owes $2,100 on the backhoe rental. Property taxes are due November 15th. If the market fails, if people walk past her table, if the Gravensteins sit there browning in the sun, she loses this farm. Not metaphorically, actually loses it. The county takes it. Her hands are flat on the table. The house is quiet. The brass knife sits next to a half-empty cup of cold coffee. She pulls Oren's journal from the shelf above the stove and opens it to a random page, and a pressed apple blossom falls into her palm. Papery, translucent, still faintly pink after what must be 15 years between those pages. Beneath it, his handwriting. The land doesn't owe you fruit. You owe it a reason to bear. She closes the book, goes to bed at 9 o'clock, sets the alarm for 4. Market day. She's set up by 6:30. A folding table, the wooden crates stacked behind her, a hand-lettered sign on brown craft paper. Gravenstein apples, heirloom, no spray, 74 cents pound. The freckles across the bridge of her nose catch the early light. Her olive-green canvas work shirt is clean for once, sleeves still rolled to the elbows. By 8 o'clock she's sold 60 pounds. By 9:30, a line. By 11, every crate is empty. People hold these apples like they're remembering something. An older woman smells one, and her eyes go wet. A man in a chef's coat, white, starched, the name of a Portland restaurant embroidered on the chest, stands at her table and asks if she can supply 200 pounds a week through October. Eleanor looks at him, wipes her hands on her jeans, says, "Those are my terms. Minimum 150 pounds, picked within 24 hours of delivery, 82 cents a pound." The chef doesn't blink. He writes a check for the first week on the spot. Have you ever wagered everything on an idea no one else believed in? Have you ever stood behind a table in the early morning, knowing that if the world doesn't show up, the world takes your land? Eleanor stood there, and the world showed up. She runs the Corvallis market every Saturday, adds the McMinnville market on Wednesdays, a third market in Eugene on alternate Sundays. The chef in Portland sends a van every Tuesday morning. Margaret helps her pack, those small, deliberate hands wrapping each layer in newspaper, the gold stud earrings catching light as she bends over the crates. She sells 11,000 pounds of apples that first fall. Gross revenue, $8,140, more than Oren ever made in a single season from this land. By the second autumn, fall of 1989, 614 of the 900 transplanted trees are bearing fruit. Let that number sit with you. 614 trees that a county agent wrote off as deadwood. Trees that neighbors said belonged in a burn pile. Trees that Eleanor Cross dug out of someone else's failure, hauled on a borrowed flatbed, and planted into soil she'd been feeding for over a year before they ever arrived. And now those root systems have done what root systems do when you give them reason to live. They've spread, they've anchored, they've found the compost she buried in layers, the fish meal, the leaf mold, the manure she turned by hand every 14 days through that brutal first winter. Organic matter in the planting zones has climbed from 1.1% to 2.4%. That's not a small number. That's the difference between dirt and soil, between something that holds water and something that drinks it, stores it, releases it slow, like a savings account paying interest all summer long. The gravity ditch feeds them without a single electric pump. No diesel, no well motor burning out at 2 in the morning. Just water moving downhill the way water has always moved, guided by clay-lined channels Orrin Cross sketched in his journal 40 years before his granddaughter cut the first shovelful. Consistent moisture, no flooding, no drought stress. The trees don't have to fight for anything, so they put all that energy into one thing: fruit. And God, do they fruit. The branches bow, not romantically, not poetically, structurally. Eleanor has to prop the heaviest limbs with forked sticks cut from her windbreak, the same way her grandfather described propping his mother's old Gravenstein back in 1947. She moves through the rows in her olive-green canvas shirt, sleeves rolled past the elbows, the brass-handled grafting knife clipped to her right pocket, catching October light. Her hands are never still. She's pressing a thumb into skin, checking give, checking sugar, checking readiness. Each apple tells her something different, and she's learned the language now. October arrives, and with it, a visitor. He shows up at the fence line on a Tuesday morning. Tom Garvey. The same man who stood in the feed store 2 years ago and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, that Eleanor Cross was planting a graveyard. He doesn't come to the door, doesn't wave, just stands at the post and wire boundary with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching her work a row of Jonagolds. She sees him, keeps picking. 5 minutes pass. 10. Then he clears his throat. How deep you dig those holes. Eleanor straightens, wipes her palms on her jeans. The same dark wash pair, soil ground permanent into the knees. She looks at him the way you'd look at weather. No anger, no triumph, just fact. 24 inches, 4-inch mulch ring. Clay-lined ditch feeds them from the north side. He nods, doesn't say thank you, doesn't say sorry, just nods, turns, walks back to his truck. The door slams. Gravel crunches. Next spring, his own transplants go in 24 inches deep. That's how it spreads. Not with apologies, not with speeches, with shovels. In November, a journalist from the Corvallis Gazette-Times drives out. Young woman, notepad, sensible boots she clearly bought for the occasion. She walks the rows with Eleanor for 2 hours, asks about the compost, the ditch system, the transplant method, takes photographs of the fruit, still hanging heavy on late-season varieties, writes everything down. The article runs December 3rd. The orchard that refused to die. 2 full pages in the weekend edition. Eleanor is quoted exactly once in the entire piece. The trees were alive. Someone just had to ask. 7 words. That's all she gives them. And it's enough. The financial picture sharpens that winter like frost on glass. Second year gross revenue, $19,400. Direct sales at 3 farmers' markets account for $7,600. The restaurant contract, that Portland chef who tasted her first Gravensteins and signed on the spot, brings $11,800. Eleanor sits at the kitchen table in December with a pencil and Orrin's old ledger book. the one with the cracked spine and the coffee ring on page 42. She pays off the equipment loan, pays off the nursery credit she'd stretched for root dip supplies, pays the back taxes Orrin left behind. Then she drives to the hardware store in town and buys materials to replace the barn roof. Cedar shakes, does the work herself over 3 weekends in January, hands raw and pink in the cold, the crescent birthmark below her left ear disappearing under a pulled-up collar. She buys Margaret a new thermos, stainless steel, double-walled, the good kind that keeps coffee hot for 8 hours. Margaret looks at it sitting on her kitchen counter, looks at Eleanor, picks up the dented aluminum one with the faded green label, the one she's carried for 20-odd years, and fills it from the pot on the stove, sets it on the counter beside the new one. "That one's too pretty to use," she says, and that's the end of it. Eleanor takes the new thermos home, puts it on a shelf, never mentions it again. Some things you offer because you need to offer them, not because they'll be accepted. Have you ever wagered everything on an idea no one else believed in? Have you stood in a room, or a field, where every voice told you to quit, and the only voice telling you to continue belonged to a dead man whose handwriting you'd memorized? That's where Eleanor lived for 2 years. And now the silence from those other voices isn't defeat. It's confirmation. Spring of 1990. Eleanor opens Orrin's journal to a chapter she's been saving. The header, written in his careful block letters, "Improving the Inheritance." Grafting. Taking the strongest rootstock, the survivors, the ones whose roots went deepest and held hardest, and joining them to new scion wood, new varieties, better fruit on proven foundations. She starts with 5 trees, the grafting knife, his grafting knife, brass handle worn smooth, makes cuts so clean the cambium layers meet like handshakes. Whip and tongue grafts, wrapped in wax-dipped cloth. She marks each one with a strip of red surveyor's tape. 3 of the 5 take. By summer, they're pushing new growth. She grafts 10 more that fall. Dale Partlow files his annual county yield report. Eleanor's per-acre production, 9,200 pounds. County average for established orchards, 6,800. He doesn't visit her again. 2019, 31 years later. Eleanor Cross is 55 years old, her auburn hair streaked with gray, and the orchard covers 94 acres. 22 varieties of heirloom apple grow on that land now. Every single one grafted onto the original Halverson rootstock she spent those first brutal years transplanting from condemned stumps into deep holes filled with municipal compost nobody else wanted. Gravenstein, Arkansas Black, Esopus Spitzenberg, Cox's Orange Pippin, varieties that haven't been commercially grown in Oregon since the 1940s, thriving on root systems that predate the Second World War. Restaurants in Portland, Seattle, Bend, and Eugene pay between $4 and $7 a pound for fruit they can't source anywhere else. 6 full-time workers tend those rows year-round. Pruning in January, thinning in June, picking through October and into November for the late keepers. The gravity-fed irrigation ditch runs clear between every row, same as it did when she first dug it with a rented backhoe and a $20 county water permit. 4 neighboring farms use the same system now. Deep hole transplanting, gravity irrigation, municipal compost amendments worked into the soil every autumn. The methods spread the way real things spread, not through pamphlets, but through fence-line conversations and visible results. Dark soil where there used to be pale volcanic dust, fruit where there used to be bare wood. And here's the part that would be funny if it weren't so damn predictable. The Deschutes County Extension Office, Dale Partlow's old outfit, the same clipboard-carrying operation that told Eleanor her land was unsuitable for commercial fruit production, that recommended she sell to the resort developer, that filed yield reports year after year watching her numbers climb past theirs, now recommends her method in their official pamphlets. Deep composting, gravity irrigation for slope orchards, heirloom rootstock preservation. It's all in there, printed on county letterhead. Her name appears nowhere in the document, not once. Dale Partlow retired in 2011, took his pension, his polished loafers, his tan clipboard with the county's seal sticker peeling at the corner, and disappeared into a condo development outside Bend. He never apologized, never acknowledged, never came back with a handshake or a question. He just became irrelevant, which is worse than defeat for a man like that. The system he represented absorbed her work without crediting it, which is exactly what systems do. Eleanor didn't fight it. She never fought any of it. She just kept working. Margaret passed in 2014, 87 years old, sitting in her kitchen with a cup of tea gone cold. Eleanor found her the next morning. The dented aluminum thermos with the faded green label sits on a shelf in the barn now, right beside Orrin's journal. The two objects lean against each other, like old friends sharing a wall. Eleanor still opens that journal sometimes, not for guidance anymore. She knows every page by heart, every pencil sketch of root angles, every margin note about soil temperature. She opens it for company, the way you might call someone you love just to hear them breathing on the other end of the line. The land outside that barn window is so dark it looks like chocolate cake. Organic matter content, 4.2%. When she started, it was 0.5. 31 years of composting, of cover crops plowed under, of apple drops left to rot where they fell, of root systems reaching deeper every season and pulling minerals up from the volcanic layer below. The soil built itself. She just gave it a reason. On a Tuesday in early October, a truck pulls up to Eleanor's gate. Old Ford, maybe a '98, rust along the wheel wells. A young woman steps out, 22, dark hair pulled back, work boots that haven't been broken in yet. She's holding a manila folder thick with papers. Her hands are shaking slightly, the way hands shake when you've driven 2 hours rehearsing what you're going to say, and you're terrified the answer will be no. Eleanor walks out from the barn, her sleeves rolled to the elbows over the cream thermal Henley, the brass-handled grafting knife clipped to her right front pocket, catching October light. She doesn't ask who the woman is. She just waits. The young woman says she inherited a hazelnut operation 2 counties over. 60 acres. The trees are dying. Bacterial blight, maybe, or just age, she doesn't know. The bank wants her to clear-cut and sell the timber rights. Everyone she's talked to says the same thing. Start over, plant new stock, take the loan. Eleanor invites her inside, makes coffee in a chipped ceramic mug, listens without interrupting for 20 minutes. The young woman finally arrives at the question she drove 2 hours to ask. How do you move trees that big without killing them? Eleanor smiles. It's the first time she's smiled like that in this story. Not tired, not defiant, not quiet. Warm. Because she's heard this question before. She heard it in her own voice 31 years ago, standing over a condemned stump with a journal full of drawings she didn't yet understand. She talks for an hour. Root radius calculations, soil temperature requirements, the deep hole method, how you dig twice as wide as you think you need, how you fill the bottom with compost so rich it's almost black, how you wrap the root ball in burlap soaked in creek water and move it at dawn when the capillaries are least stressed. She talks the way Oren's journal talks, specific, patient, fascinated by the mechanics of living things. When the coffee's gone and the light outside has shifted from gold to copper, Eleanor reaches into her right front pocket. She unclips the brass-handled grafting knife, the one that's been there every single day for 31 years, the one her grandfather sharpened on a river stone, the one she used to make her first graft cut into Halverson rootstock on a morning when nobody believed it would take. She sets the grafting knife in the young woman's palm, closes her fingers around it, and says, "The land doesn't owe you fruit. You owe it a reason to bear." The trees behind them are heavy with October apples, bowing under the weight of the question she asked 31 years ago.